The meeting room fell silent the moment she stepped inside. A little girl, no older than 6. Barefoot, clothes wrinkled, hair tangled, and carrying a smell so strong and sour that even the toughest men in the Mafia flinched. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just walked straight up to the Mafia boss's desk and lifted her arm as if showing him something. "Kid," Marco muttered, frowning. "Where's your mother? What happened to you?" But when he leaned closer, when he looked under her arm, his face drained of color. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't sweat. It was bruise marks, deep purple, finger-shaped, so fresh they were still swelling. And beneath those bruises, a small folded piece of paper taped to her skin. Marco's hands shook as he peeled it off. The note had only 5 words. "She said you protect me." The room froze. The girl stared up at him with eyes full of terror, as if the moment she stopped moving, someone would drag her away forever. Marco rose from his chair, slow, controlled, dangerous. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "who put this on you?" The girl whispered. One name, just one. And the Mafia boss exploded, flipping the table, roaring orders as his men scrambled, because the name she said was the last person he ever expected. "Stay with me until the end, because the truth behind that little girl's bruises will expose the darkest betrayal the Mafia boss has ever faced." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Marco Santini had built his empire on 3 simple rules: never hurt children, never betray family, and never, ever let emotions cloud your judgment. For 23 years, these rules had kept him alive in a world where most men don't see 30. But standing there looking down at this broken little girl, every rule was about to be tested. The child couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds. Her dress, once pink, was now stained with dirt and something darker. Her feet were cut and bleeding, as if she had walked miles on broken glass. But it was her eyes that hit Marco like a punch to the gut. They held a kind of emptiness that no 6-year-old should ever possess. "What's your name?" "Sweetheart," Marco asked, his voice gentler than any of his men had ever heard it. "Lucia," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. The name sent ice through Marco's veins. There was only one Lucia he knew, his brother's daughter. His brother, who had been dead for 3 years. Lucia Santini. Marco's voice cracked slightly. The little girl nodded, and Marco felt the world tilt on its axis. This was his niece, his brother Antonio's child, who was supposed to be safe in protective custody with social services after Antonio's murder. The child, he had been told, was being cared for by a loving foster family. Upstate, Marco's lieutenant, Sal, stepped forward. "Boss, maybe we should call." "Nobody calls anybody," Marco snapped, his eyes never leaving Lucia. "Close the doors. Nobody comes in. Nobody goes out." The men exchanged glances, but obeyed without question. When Marco Santini gave an order, you followed it. No questions asked. Marco knelt down to Lucia's eye level, careful not to tower over her. "Lucia, honey, I'm your Uncle Marco. You remember me?" A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Uncle Marco with the scary friends. Despite everything, Marco almost smiled. "Yeah, baby. Uncle Marco with the scary friends. Can you tell me, who hurt you?" Lucia's tiny hand reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph. It was old and faded, but Marco recognized it immediately. It was a picture of him, Antonio, and their sister Maria at a family barbecue 5 years ago. But someone had drawn red X's over Antonio's face and his own. Only Maria's face remained untouched. "She said you were bad men," Lucia whispered. "She said you killed Daddy." The photograph trembled in Marco's hands. Maria, his own sister. The woman who had held his hand when their mother died. Who had made him promise to always protect family. Who had cried at Antonio's funeral and sworn she would never forgive the people who killed him. "Where have you been living, Lucia?" Marco asked, though he was beginning to piece together the horrifying truth. "With Aunt Maria. But she got mad when I asked about you. She said you were dangerous. She said I couldn't talk about you anymore." Marco's jaw clenched. Maria had taken Lucia. Somehow she had manipulated the system, probably bribed the right people, and taken custody of his niece. The same sister who had been feeding information to their enemies for months. The same sister whose phone calls had been monitored by his security team, revealing meetings with rival families, but this using a child. Hurting Antonio's daughter, this crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "The bruises, sweetheart," Marco said softly. "When did those happen?" Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "Yesterday. I asked if I could call you. I remembered your phone number from when Daddy taught me." She got really mad and grabbed my arm. She said if I ever mention your name again, she'd make sure I never talk to anybody ever again. The room was so quiet you could hear the city breathing 26 floors below. Marco's men stood frozen, watching their boss process information that was clearly destroying him from the inside out. How did you get here, baby? I waited until she went to sleep. Then I climbed out the window. I walked all night. I remembered where your building was because Daddy brought me here once for your birthday party. The man downstairs tried to stop me, but I told him I was family. Marco turned to look at his security chief, Tony, who was standing near the door. Tony nodded grimly. The little girl had somehow made it past multiple layers of security, through a building where armed guards checked every visitor, simply because she had claimed to be family. In any other circumstance, heads would roll today. Marco was grateful for his men's judgment call. The note taped to her arm made terrible sense now. Maria had put it there knowing Lucia would find a way to reach Marco. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a message. A twisted game. Maria was daring him to choose between his code of never hurting family and his promise to protect the innocent. But as Marco looked at Lucia's bruised arm, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she flinched every time someone moved too quickly, he realized there was no choice to make. Maria had stopped being family the moment she laid hands on this child. Marco stood slowly, his mind already calculating moves and counter-moves. He pulled out his phone and speed dialed the number. Double quotes Dr. Reyes. It's Marco. I need you here immediately. Bring everything for treating a child. And Dr. Complete discretion. He hung up and turned to his men. Sal, I want every piece of information on Maria's location. Phone records, credit cards, surveillance footage, everything from the last 72 hours. Tony, secure this floor. Nobody gets access without my personal authorization. The room erupted into controlled chaos as his men sprang into action. But Marco's attention remained focused on Lucia, who was now sitting in his chair, her tiny frame dwarfed by the massive leather seat. Uncle Marco, she said quietly, are you going to hurt Aunt Maria? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Marco looked at this innocent child, this last piece of his brother Antonio, and felt something crack deep inside his chest. No, sweetheart, he said finally. Uncle Marco is going to make sure nobody ever hurts you again. But as he said those words, Marco Santini was already planning exactly how he was going to make his sister pay for what she had done. Because some betrayals are unforgivable, and some family members forfeit their right to mercy the moment they choose to become monsters. The war was about to begin, and this time it was personal. Dr. Reyes arrived within 20 minutes, her medical bag in hand and questions written across her face. She had been Marco's personal physician for 8 years, patching up bullet wounds and keeping secrets that could topple governments. But when she saw Lucia curled up in the oversized chair, her professional mask slipped for just a moment. She's been through hell, Dr. Reyes whispered to Marco as she knelt beside Lucia. These bruises are consistent with adult grip marks. Whoever did this used significant force. Marco watched as the doctor gently examined his knees, noting each injury with clinical precision. A split lip that was healing wrong, finger marks around her wrist, a bruise on her shoulder blade shaped like a shoe print. How long has this been happening? Dr. Reyes asked Lucia directly, her voice soft and reassuring. Since Daddy's funeral. Lucia replied matter-of-factly. Aunt Maria said I had to learn to be quiet. She said if I made noise, the bad men would find me. The irony wasn't lost on Marco. Maria had been conditioning this child to fear the very family who would die to protect her. While Dr. Reyes worked, Sal returned with a tablet full of information. His face was grim as he approached Marco's desk. Boss, you're not going to like this. Maria's been playing a longer game than we thought. Marco gestured for him to continue, his eyes never leaving Lucia as the doctor cleaned her wounds. She's been in contact with the Torino family for 6 months. Phone records show regular calls to Vincent Torino himself. But here's the kicker, she's been using Lucia as leverage. Marco's blood turned to ice. The Torinos were their biggest rivals, the family responsible for Antonio's death. If Maria had been feeding them information, using his niece as some kind of insurance policy. There's more, Sal continued, lowering his voice. We found surveillance footage from 3 blocks away. Maria dropped Lucia off at the corner this morning. She watched from her car to make sure the kid actually made it to the building. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a desperate escape by a terrified child. This was a calculated move by Maria, using Lucia as a living message. But what was she trying to communicate? Marco's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered on the second ring. Hello, brother. Maria's voice was calm, almost cheerful. as if she hadn't just traumatized a 6-year-old and declared war on her own family. Maria. Marco's voice was deadly quiet. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain yourself before I turn the city upside down looking for. Yo, Marco, always so dramatic. Did you like my little gift? I thought it was time you met your niece properly. She's been asking about you for months. You put your hands on a child. Our brother's child. Maria's laugh was cold. That child is a liability, just like Antonio was. Just like you are. The Torinos offered me something you never could. Marco, a way out of this life. Marco felt his world crystallize into perfect, deadly focus. What do you want? Simple. You're going to walk away from the business. Transfer everything to the Torinos. In exchange, they'll let you live. You have 48 hours to decide. And if I refuse, then little Lucia disappears permanently. This time. And before you get any ideas about finding me, remember that I know every safe house, every contact, every escape route you've ever used. I helped build half of them. The line went dead. Marco stared at his phone, processing what had just happened. His sister, his own blood, had just threatened to murder a child to force his surrender. The same sister who had sung lullabies to him when he had nightmares as a boy. Boss. Sal's voice seemed to come from very far away. Marco looked up, seeing his lieutenant's concerned expression. Then he looked at Lucia, who was now wearing fresh bandages and a borrowed shirt from Dr. Reyes' bag. Change of plans, Marco said quietly. I want every available man on the street. Find Maria. Find the Torinos. And put the word out, anyone who helps them disappears. What about the 48-hour deadline? Marco walked over to Lucia, who looked up at him with those devastating eyes. Uncle. Marco, are you okay? You look sad. He knelt down beside her chair. I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm angry. But not at you. Never at you. Are you angry at Aunt Maria? The question hung in the air. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you become monsters? That sometimes family betrays family in ways that can never be forgiven? Yes, baby. I'm very angry at Aunt Maria. But I promise you something right now, she will never hurt you again. Lucia nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of that promise. Marco stood and turned back to Sal. There is number 48-hour deadline. We end this tonight, boss. If we move too fast, she might what? Kill a child she's already been torturing for months. Sal, my sister stopped being family the moment she chose money over blood. The moment she chose the Torinos over us. The moment she put her hands on Antonio's daughter. The room fell silent as Marco's men processed this declaration. They all knew what it meant. Maria Santini had just become enemy number 1. But before Marco could issue more orders, his phone rang again. This time it was Tony calling from downstairs. Boss, we got a problem. There's about 20 Torino soldiers surrounding the building. They're not trying to hide it. Vincent Torino himself is standing across the street with a bullhorn. Marco walked to the window and looked down. Sure enough, Vincent Torino stood on the sidewalk like he owned it, surrounded by armed men who weren't even pretending to be discreet. What's he saying? He wants to talk. Says he has something that belongs to you. Marco's blood ran cold. In the reflection of the window, he could see Lucia watching him with those ancient eyes. Tell him I'll be right down. Boss, tell him I'll be right down, alone. Because Marco Santini had just realized something that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't about money or territory or business deals. This was about revenge. And the Torinos had been planning this moment since the day they put a bullet in Antonio's head. The war wasn't about to begin. It had already started 3 years ago. And Lucia had been their prisoner of war this entire time. Marco stood at the elevator doors, adjusting his cufflinks one final time. 26 floors separated him from Vincent Torino, and whatever twisted game was about to unfold on the street below. But as the elevator descended, carrying him toward what could be his final confrontation, Marco's mind wasn't on strategy or survival. It was on the little girl sitting in his chair upstairs, wearing bandages that told a story no child should ever have to live. The elevator dinged softly at each floor. 25, 24, 23. Each number counting down like a timer on a bomb that had been ticking for 3 years. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Marco's building manager, Giuseppe, was waiting with a face full of worry. Mr. Santini, sir, they've been out there for 20 minutes. The police aren't coming. I think someone's been paid off. Marco nodded grimly. Of course the cops had been bought. The Torinos didn't make moves this bold without clearing the field first. Giuseppe, I want you to lock down the building. Nobody gets in or out without my personal say-so. And if something happens to me down there, You call Dr. Reyes and tell her to take care of the little girl upstairs. Giuseppe's eyes widened. In 15 years of managing this building, he had never heard Marco Santini sound anything close to defeated. Sir, maybe we should call for backup. Your men could be here in minutes. No. Marco's voice was final. This ends with family. It started with family, and that's how it's going to finish. The glass doors of the lobby reflected Marco's image as he approached them. For the first time in years, he looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from late nights or difficult negotiations, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones when you realize that everything you've built your life on has been a lie. Marco pushed through the doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The afternoon sun hit his face, warm and bright, completely at odds with the darkness of the moment. Across the street, Vincent Torino waited with the patience of a man who had been planning this conversation for a very long time. Vincent was everything Marco wasn't. Where Marco was calculated and controlled, Vincent was flashy and loud. His suit probably cost more than most people made in a year. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. His smile was the kind that promised pain. Marco Santini, Vincent called out, his voice carrying easily across the street. The great protector himself. How's the family business? Marco crossed the street slowly, his hands visible, making no aggressive moves. The Torino soldiers formed a loose circle around them, but Vincent waved them back slightly. This conversation was going to happen between bosses. Vincent. Marco's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I got your sister's message loud and clear. Vincent's smile widened. Maria's quite the negotiator, isn't she? Smart woman. Smarter than her brothers. That's for sure. She figured out something that took me years to understand. And what's that? That family loyalty is just another weakness to exploit. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun. Marco felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about business or territory. This was personal in ways he was only beginning to understand. Let me tell you a story, Marco. Vincent continued, beginning to pace in a small circle. 3 years ago, your brother Antonio cost me $1 million in a deal gone wrong. He burned down one of my warehouses, killed 3 of my men. You remember that night, don't you? Marco remembered. Antonio had been trying to send a message to the Torinos about them muscling into Santini territory. The warehouse fire had been meant as a warning, but 3 men had died, and Vincent had sworn vengeance. So I did what any businessman would do. I eliminated the problem. 1 bullet, clean and simple. Case closed. Marco's jaw clenched. But he remained silent. Vincent was building to something, and Marco needed to hear all of it. But then something interesting happened. Your sister Maria reached out to me. Said she was disgusted by the violence. Said she wanted out of the family business. Said she could provide information in exchange for protection. The pieces were falling into place now, each revelation worse than the last. Maria hadn't just betrayed them recently. She had been feeding information to the Torinos since Antonio's death. At first, it was small stuff. Vincent continued. Meeting times, shipment schedules, nothing too important. But then Maria came to me with a much more interesting proposition. She said there was something that would hurt you more than bullets ever could. Marco's blood turned to ice. Lucia, smart man, see. Maria knew that your one weakness was family, specifically children. She knew that Antonio's little girl was your soft spot. So we made a deal. Vincent stopped pacing and looked directly into Marco's eyes. Maria would take custody of the kid officially through the legal system. She had connections, knew the right people to bribe, and slowly, carefully, she'd make that child's life a living hell. Not enough to kill her, just enough to break her spirit, to turn Antonio's daughter into a weapon against you. The rage that built in Marco's chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was white-hot and consuming, threatening to burn away every ounce of self-control he had spent decades building. You see, Marco, I learned something from watching your family over the years. You Santinis think love is strength, but love is just another form of weakness. And today we're going to prove it. Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Marco the screen. It was a live video feed of a warehouse somewhere across the city. In the center of the frame, tied to a chair, was Maria. She was bruised and bloodied, clearly beaten, but she was alive. Here's how this is going to work, Vincent said, his voice now deadly serious. You're going to choose your sister or your niece. I can make one phone call and Maria dies. Or you can walk away from this life, hand over your operations to me, and Maria lives. But here's the beautiful part: if you choose to save Maria, little Lucia learns the truth about who her family really is. She learns that Uncle Marco chose the woman who tortured her over her own safety. Marco stared at the screen, watching his sister struggle against her bonds. Maria looked terrified, desperate, nothing like the calculating woman who had been playing both sides for 3 years. And if I choose Lucia, then Maria dies and you live with the knowledge that you could have saved your sister but chose not to. Either way, your family destroys itself. Either way, I win. The street around them had gone completely quiet. Even the traffic seemed to have stopped. The only sound was Marco's heartbeat pounding in his ears as he processed the impossible choice Vincent was offering him. But as Marco looked at Vincent's smug expression, something unexpected happened. He started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, then grew into full-blown laughter that echoed off the buildings around them. Vincent's confident expression began to slip. What's so funny? Marco wiped his eyes, still chuckling. You know what, Vincent, you're absolutely right about one thing. Family loyalty can be a weakness. But you made one critical mistake in your planning. And what's that? Marco's expression turned deadly serious. You assumed I still considered Maria family. Before Vincent could react, Marco pulled out his phone and made a call. Tony, execute Operation Nightfall. All targets. Now. Vincent's phone started buzzing frantically. Then the phones of every soldier around them began ringing at once. Panicked voices could be heard through the speakers reporting explosions, raids, arrests happening across the city. You see, Vincent, while you were busy playing psychological games with a 6-year-old, I was doing what I do best. I was planning. For the past 3 hours, my men have been moving into position around every Torino operation in the city. Every warehouse, every front business, every safe house. Vincent's face had gone pale. That's impossible. We would have seen movement that large. Not if you're getting your intelligence from someone who's been feeding you exactly what I wanted. You didn't know for the past 6 months. The truth hit Vincent like a physical blow. You knew. You knew Maria was working for us. Double quotes. Marco nodded slowly. I've known since day one. The question was how to use that information to destroy you completely. Maria thought she was playing both sides, but she was actually my unknowing double agent. Every piece of information she gave you was carefully crafted to lead you into this exact moment. The sound of sirens began to fill the air. Not police sirens, those had been bought off. These were federal sirens. FBI agencies that couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and had been building cases against the Torinos for years based on information Marco had been carefully feeding them through Maria. The warehouse where you're holding Maria. My men have been watching it for hours. The moment you made your little phone call threat, they moved in. She's already been extracted. Vincent's soldiers were looking around nervously, realizing they were surrounded by federal agents closing in from every direction. The carefully planned ambush had become a trap, and they were the ones caught in it. But here's the part that's going to hurt, Vincent, Marco continued, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority. Lucia was never the weapon you thought she was. She was the bait. Every bruise, every tear, every moment of pain that child endured was building evidence for a federal case. That's going to put you away forever. Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket, but Marco was faster. Not with a gun, with words. I wouldn't do that if I were you. See those red laser dots on your chest? Those aren't from my men. Those are federal snipers. You so much as twitch wrong, and this conversation ends permanently. Vincent's hand froze. Around them, his soldiers were slowly raising their hands as FBI agents emerged from buildings, cars, and rooftops with weapons drawn. You used a child, Vincent. You tortured an innocent little girl to get to me, and that's something I can never forgive. As federal agents moved in to make arrest, Marco turned and walked back toward his building. Behind him, he could hear Vincent screaming threats, promises of revenge, declarations that this wasn't over. But Marco knew better. It was over. It had been over the moment Vincent Torino decided to involve Lucia in this war. The elevator ride back to the 26th floor felt different. This time lighter somehow. When the doors opened, Marco found Dr. Reyes sitting beside Lucia, who was coloring in a book that someone had brought her. Uncle Marco. Lucia looked up with a smile. The first genuine expression of joy Marco had seen from her. Dr. Reyes says, "My arm is going to be all better soon." Marco knelt down beside her chair. "That's right, sweetheart. And you know what else? The people who hurt you are never going to hurt anyone ever again." "What about Aunt Maria?" Marco hesitated. "How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her aunt was both victim and perpetrator? That sometimes people make choices that put them beyond redemption, even when they themselves are suffering. Aunt Maria is going to go away for a while," Marco said finally, She needs to think about the choices she made. But you don't have to worry about her anymore. Lucia nodded solemnly, then returned to her coloring. She was drawing a picture of a house with flowers in the yard, and stick figures holding hands in front of it. Is that your family? Dr. Reyes asked gently. It's my new family, Lucia said matter-of-factly. Uncle Marco and me, and maybe some other people who won't hurt me. Marco felt something break open in his chest. Not the painful crack of betrayal he had been carrying for hours, but something warmer, something that felt like hope. Sweetheart, he said softly, would you like to live with Uncle Marco? Would you like this to be your home? Lucia looked up at him with those devastating eyes, and for the first time since she had walked into his office, they held something other than fear. They held trust. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. As Marco held his niece's small hand, he realized that Vincent Torino had been wrong about everything. Love wasn't weakness. Family loyalty wasn't a liability to be exploited. Sometimes, when everything else falls apart, family is the only thing that saves you. And sometimes saving family means redefining what family actually means. 6 months later, Marco stood in the kitchen of his penthouse apartment, watching Lucia carefully arrange colorful cereal pieces in perfect rows across her bowl. She had developed little rituals like this since coming to live with him, organizing things, creating order from chaos, finding control in the small details of her daily life. Uncle Marco, she said, without looking up from her cereal arrangement. The lady from the court is coming today, right? Marco nodded, pouring coffee into his favorite mug. That's right, sweetheart. Miss Peterson wants to see how you're doing, just like she is every month. Today's visit was different, though. Today, the social worker would be making her final assessment for the permanent adoption papers. After months of supervised visits, psychological evaluations, and home inspections, this was the moment that would determine whether Lucia could officially become his daughter. The doorbell chimed at exactly 9 o'clock. Miss Peterson was nothing if not punctual. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had seen enough broken children to develop a healthy skepticism about sudden transformations in their circumstances. Good morning, Mr. Santini, she said, settling into the living room chair she had claimed as her own during these visits. And how are you today, Lucia? Lucia looked up from her cereal with the careful politeness she reserved for authority figures. I'm good, Miss Peterson. I finished all my homework yesterday, and Uncle Marco helped me practice reading. Over the past 6 months, Marco had watched his niece slowly emerge from the shell of trauma she had been trapped in. The nightmares had gradually decreased. The flinching when adults moved too quickly had mostly stopped. She had even started really laughing at cartoons and silly jokes. But Miss Peterson's job wasn't to observe progress. Her job was to determine whether this environment was truly stable, whether Marco Santini could provide the kind of life a 6-year-old deserved. Mr. Santini, Miss Peterson began, consulting her notes. I need to address some concerns that have been raised about your lifestyle and its potential impact on Lucia's development. Marco looked Miss Peterson directly in the eyes, his voice steady and unwavering. My lifestyle changed the day Lucia walked through that door. Everything I built, everything I fought for, it all means nothing if I can't protect the one person who matters most. Miss Peterson studied his face for a long moment, then turned to watch Lucia, who was now showing her stuffed animals the proper way to sit for story time. The psychological evaluations show remarkable progress. Her therapist believes she's formed a secure attachment. The school reports are excellent. She closed her folder and stood up. Mr. Santini, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I've seen children placed in mansions who were miserable, and children placed in tiny apartments who thrived. What matters isn't the size of the home or the bank account. It's whether a child feels safe, loved, and valued. Marco held his breath. Lucia has all 3 of those things here. The adoption will be approved. 6 months later, Lucia Santini legally now ran into Marco's arms after her first day of 2nd grade, chattering excitedly about her new teacher and the friends she had made. As Marco listened to her animated stories, he realized that sometimes the most powerful thing a dangerous man can do is choose to be gentle. That little girl who had walked into his office broken and afraid had saved them both. She had taught him that real strength isn't about fear or control. It's about love, protection, and the courage to choose family over everything else. What started as betrayal had become redemption. What began with violence had ended with hope. And that's the most beautiful plot twist.